The first shovelful of sand hit the pool with a wet, mocking splat. Karen Weatherstone stood back, her carefully manicured fingers gripping the handle of the industrial-grade shovel like a warrior's weapon, a triumphant gleam in her eyes that suggested she'd just won the most important battle of her life. Technically, it was Trevor Henderson's pool, but in Karen's meticulously organized world, anything that violated the sacred scrolls of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association was fair game for correction. The problem had started 3 weeks earlier when Trevor, a 35-year-old software engineer, had committed the cardinal sin of painting his fence a shade of gray that was, and Karen would die on this hill minus 0.5 degrees darker than the approved dove gray in the HOA handbook. When he'd laughed off her initial warning, Karen knew war had been declared. She had always been the enforcer of Sunnyside Estates. For 15 years, her eagle eyes had caught every errant lawn ornament, every blade of grass that dared grow a millimeter too high. Her husband, Richard, had long since retreated into his home office, leaving her to manage the neighborhood with the precision of a military strategist. This pool was different. This was personal. Trevor's pool sat like a blue rectangle of rebellion, its water sparkling with what Karen saw as pure defiance. Each day, its very existence seemed to mock her authority. The unauthorized pool fence, slightly too short. The deck, constructed without proper HOA approval. Her landscaping, a chaotic mess of native plants that refused to conform to the perfectly trimmed hedges and identical rose bushes that defined Sunnyside. As she dumped the third wheelbarrow of sand into the pristine water, Karen felt a rush of power. The sand swirled, creating a murky landscape that was both horrifying and fascinating. Each grain was a tiny soldier in her war against non-compliance. "He'll learn," she muttered to herself, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from her forehead. Her pale blue polo shirt, embroidered with the Sunnyside Estates logo, was dusty but immaculate, a testament to her ability to emerge from chaos looking perfectly pressed. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps, didn't notice the shadow that fell across her meticulously destroyed pool until a voice cut through her moment of triumph. "Mrs. Weatherstone, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Karen turned, shovel still in hand, sand trickling from its edge. Her neighborhood watchdog routine was about to get very interesting. Little did she know this was only the beginning of a saga that would test every boundary of her self-proclaimed authority and expose the dangerous depths of her obsession with control. Trevor's voice was a mixture of disbelief and controlled anger. "Are you filling my pool with sand?" Karen straightened her spine, adopting the same tone she used during HOA board meetings, part administrative, part drill sergeant. "This is a violation correction, Mr. Henderson. Your pool does not meet community standards, and I'm implementing a remediation process." The absurdity of her statement hung in the air between them. Sand continued to cascade from her shovel, creating a miniature beach where crystal-clear water had once been. "Remediation?" Trevor's laugh was sharp, cutting. "You're destroying my property. That's vandalism, pure and simple." Around them, the perfectly manicured lawns of Sunnyside Estates seemed to hold their breath. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically in the distance, the only sound breaking the tension. Karen's mind raced. She had planned this meticulously. The pool was an unauthorized addition. At least, that's how she argued it. The HOA bylaws were crystal clear about modifications requiring explicit board approval. She caught Trevor twice before, once for his non-regulation mailbox, another time for those unapproved solar panels that disrupted the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. This was about more than a pool. This was about maintaining order. "I have documentation," she said, reaching into her fanny pack, a beige monstrosity that held her official HOA clipboard, measuring tape, and an array of color-coded violation notices. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying a hint of underlying anxiety. Trevor stepped closer. He was tall, lean, with the kind of calm that suggested he'd dealt with difficult people before. "Documentation doesn't give you the right to destroy my property. You're going to pay for this." The first sirens in the distance made Karen's heart race. She'd anticipated this moment, the confrontation, the potential legal challenge. But something in Trevor's eyes made her realize this was different from her previous neighborhood skirmishes. Police cars approached, their lights cutting through the suburban tranquility. Karen's perfectly applied makeup began to crack, not physically but metaphorically. For the first time, she saw herself through someone else's eyes. Not a guardian of community standards, but a woman destroying another person's property. "I was protecting the neighborhood," she whispered, more to herself than to Trevor. Officer Rodriguez was the first to step out of the patrol car. He responded to HOA disputes before, but never anything quite like this. The sand-filled pool gleamed grotesquely in the afternoon sun, a testament to Karen's misguided crusade. "Ma'am," he said, his voice professional but edged with something close to disbelief, "I'm going to need you to explain exactly what happened here." Karen gripped her shovel tighter. The neighborhood watched from behind perfectly trimmed curtains. Her entire reputation, her entire sense of self, balanced on what she would say next. The sand continued to settle, transforming the pool into a bizarre landscape of destruction and misplaced righteousness. Trevor stood silent, his arms crossed, waiting. This was more than a neighborhood dispute now. This was a moment of reckoning. The police station's fluorescent lights were unforgiving. Karen sat in the interview room, her beige fanny pack now a sad, deflated thing on the metallic table. Her perfectly pressed polo shirt had lost its crisp edges, the Sunnyside Estates logo looking more like a badge of shame than a mark of authority. Officer Rodriguez flipped through the HOA bylaws, his expression a mixture of confusion and barely concealed annoyance. "Let me get this straight, Mrs. Weatherstone. You filled someone's private property, a swimming pool, with sand because you believed it wasn't properly authorized?" Karen's fingers traced the edge of the table. She'd navigated countless HOA meetings, issued hundreds of violation notices, but this was different. This was personal. The pool didn't meet community standards, she repeated, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Trevor sat in the adjacent room giving his statement. Through the one-way glass, Karen could see him, calm, collected, his lawyer already en route. She recognized the type, tech professional, probably knew money, someone who didn't understand the importance of maintaining community standards. Her husband, Richard's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "Karen, not everything is at battle," he'd said, stirring his morning coffee with a resignation that spoke volumes about their decades-long marriage. But this was different. This was about principles. The door opened. A woman in a crisp suit entered, Lisa Chen, the city's senior code enforcement officer. She carried a thick folder and looked like someone who had seen every possible variation of neighborhood conflict. "Mrs. Weatherstone," Lisa began, her voice professional but not unkind, "do you understand the severity of your actions?" Karen's mind raced. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about her entire identity. 15 years of being the Sunnyside Estates' most vigilant protector. Each violation notice she'd ever issued, each complaint she filed, now hung in a delicate balance. "I was protecting the neighborhood's integrity," Karen said, but the words sounded weaker with each repetition. Lisa spread out documents. HOA bylaws, property records, Trevor's building permits. These actually show that Mr. Henderson's pool was completely legal. He filed all necessary paperwork 6 months ago. The board, your board, approved it. The revelation hit Karen like a physical blow. All of this, the sand, the destruction, humiliation, based on a mistake she overlooked. Her phone buzzed, a group text from the HOA board. "Emergency meeting called. Your actions under review." The passive-aggressive punctuation spoke volumes. Richard would be mortified. The neighbors would talk. Her reputation, carefully cultivated over years of meticulous rule enforcement, was crumbling faster than the sand settling in Trevor's pool. "I almost speak to my lawyer," Karen said, the words automatic, a defensive mechanism kicking in. Lisa Chen's eyes softened momentarily. She'd seen this before, the moment when rigid enforcement met human complexity. "That might be a good idea, Mrs. Weatherstone." Outside, the suburban afternoon continued. Sprinklers clicked. Lawnmowers hummed. But inside this interview room, Karen's carefully constructed world was transforming, grain by grain, just like the sand she dumped into that pool. The Sunnyside Estates Community Center had never been so packed. Emergency HOA meetings were typically dry affairs, budget discussions, landscaping reports, the occasional heated debate about mailbox designs. But this was a spectacle. Karen sat at the front, no longer the commanding presence she'd been for 15 years. Her usual seat at the head of the board table now felt like an electric chair of social judgment. The room buzzed with a toxic mixture of gossip, outrage, and barely concealed glee. 17 years, whispered Martha Holloway to her bridge club friend, just loud enough for Karen to hear. 17 years of her policing every single blade of grass in this neighborhood, and now this. Trevor sat directly opposite her, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the maelstrom surrounding them. His lawyer, a razor-sharp woman named Elena Rodriguez, had prepared a presentation that would make Karen's life significantly more complicated. Board President Gerald Thompson cleared his throat. A retired bank manager with a penchant for three-piece suits and parliamentary procedure, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mrs. Weatherstone," he began, his voice a mixture of disappointment and bureaucratic formality, "the board has reviewed the incident with Mr. Henderson's pool. We've received multiple statements, including photographic evidence and police reports." Karen's mind wandered to the mounting legal bills. Richard had been unnervingly quiet since her arrest. Their monthly bridge club, where she'd once been the unquestioned social queen, had already canceled their next gathering. Her phone remained silent, save for a few passive-aggressive text messages from former friends. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her digital presentation cutting through the tension like a knife. Property damage calculations, legal violations, potential civil suits, each slide was another nail in Karen's social coffin. Not only did Mrs. Weatherstone destroy private property, Elena said, her voice clinical and precise, but she did so based on a complete misunderstanding of the HOA's own bylaws. Mr. Henderson's pool was fully approved 6 months ago. In fact, Mrs. Weatherstone would have known had she bothered to check the board's recent records. The room erupted. Years of suppressed resentment toward Karen's micromanagement came flooding out. Stories emerged, petty violations she'd written, lives she'd made difficult, the reign of terror she maintained over the neighborhood's aesthetic. Remember when she made the Petersons repaint their entire house because the shade was 2% off the approved color? Someone muttered. Or when she measured lawn heights with a ruler? Another voice chimed in. Gerald Thompson's voice cut through the murmurs. The board's preliminary recommendation is your immediate removal from all HOA positions and a comprehensive review of your past enforcement actions. Karen felt the room spinning. This was more than losing a position. This was losing her identity. Trevor caught her eye. There was no triumph there, just a strange mixture of pity and understanding. He knew this was about more than a pool. This was about control, about power, about a woman who had built her entire sense of self around enforcing rules. As the meeting continued, Karen realized something terrifying. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she wasn't sure who she was without the rulebook she'd wielded for so long. The sand from the pool seemed to echo in her mind. Grain by grain, her life was shifting, transforming into something unrecognizable. The therapist's office felt like neutral territory, neither the rigid world of HOA regulations nor the chaotic landscape of Karen's recent downfall. Dr. Elena Ramirez was different from anyone Karen had encountered before. No clipboard, no immediate judgment, just a calm patience that made Karen's carefully constructed defenses feel paper thin. Control, Dr. Ramirez said, not as a question, but as an observation, has been your primary language for a long time. Karen's fingers traced the seam of her chalky pants. No longer the crisp polo and embroidered HOA logo, just ordinary clothing. Ordinary. The word felt like a punishment. Her marriage was the first casualty. Richard had moved into the guest room 2 weeks after the pool incident. I don't know you anymore, he said, not with anger, but with a profound sense of loss that cut deeper than any accusation. The neighborhood whispers had become a constant soundtrack. Grocery store encounters became minefields. Mrs. Peterson, whose house paint she'd once forced to be repainted, now smiled with a coldness that spoke volumes. The Bridge Club, her social fortress for 15 years, had effectively excommunicated her. I was protecting something, Karen heard herself say to Dr. Ramirez. Someone has to maintain standards. The therapist leaned forward. Protecting what? The neighborhood? Or something inside yourself? It was a question Karen had been avoiding. Her father, a retired military colonel, had lived and died by regulations. Perfection was the only acceptable state. Growing up, her worth had been measured in straight lines, in precisely maintained margins, and absolute compliance. The HOA had been her battlefield, her way of creating order in a world that felt perpetually on the edge of chaos. My entire identity was those rules, she whispered. The admission felt like pulling a splinter, painful, but necessary. Trevor's lawsuit was pending. The financial implications were staggering. Their savings, carefully accumulated over decades, were being consumed by legal fees. Richard's retirement investments were now potential settlement money. But something else was happening, something unexpected. In losing everything, Karen was being forced to see herself for the first time. Not as the neighborhood enforcer, not as her father's dutiful daughter, just a human being, flawed and complicated. Dr. Ramirez's next words were gentle. Losing your position doesn't mean losing yourself. It means discovering who you actually are. A text buzzed. It was from an unknown number. Karen hesitated, then opened it. We need to talk. Trevor. The message hummed there, pregnant with the possibility. Redemption. Further punishment. Another layer of complexity in a situation that had long ago stopped being about a simple pool violation. Outside the therapist's window, a sprinkler clicked on, rhythmic, predictable, just like the life she once controlled before everything fell apart. Karen took a deep breath. For the first time in decades, she had no